All right, so you want to know more about crime in Winnipeg,
Yeah.
and you've given us some interesting data to dig into from Statistics Canada
Okay.
and the Winnipeg Police Service's own 2023 statistical report.
Mm.
So we're going to break it all down
Yeah.
and see what kind of picture these reports paint about crime trends in 2023.
All right.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a solid understanding of what's going on.
It'll be interesting to see how these two sources kind of complement each other. Statistics Canada provides kind of a broader national perspective,
Yeah,
while the Winnipeg Police Service report offers like a closer look at the specific realities on the ground.
for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. Okay, let's unpack this before we get into the numbers.
Okay.
I think it's helpful to understand who makes up the Winnipeg Police Service
Right.
and what they're dealing with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
The report highlights they have 1,366 officers
Mm-hmm.
and 86 volunteers serving a population of over 785,000 people.
That's a pretty considerable responsibility.
Yeah, it is.
And it's interesting that the force is becoming increasingly diverse.
Yeah.
The report mentions that 32% of recruits are Indigenous peoples,
Okay.
18% are racialized peoples,
Mhm.
and 32% are women.
Wow.
They also have personnel who speak over 40 languages, reflecting the city's multicultural makeup.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And let's not forget about those volunteers. Over 9,200 volunteer hours were logged.
Wow.
That's a substantial contribution to the community.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of changes, the report also highlights a shift in how crime is reported.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like we're moving into a more digital age with this. What can you tell us about that?
The data reveals a clear increase in online reporting.
Okay.
In 2017, there were approximately 17,689 online reports. Fast forward to 2023, that number jumped to 22,104.
That's a significant increase.
Yeah.
What kind of impact does this have on the overall picture of crime?
It certainly raises some interesting questions.
Yeah.
For example, does online reporting make it easier for people to report certain crimes? The report mentions that the most common crimes reported online in 2023 were mischief,
Okay.
theft from vehicles,
Yeah.
and shoplifting. These are crimes that don't necessarily require like an immediate police presence.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. If someone, like, finds their car window smashed,
Mhm.
they're probably not going to want to wait on hold with the police.
No.
So it sounds like online reporting adds a level of convenience
Right.
for both citizens and the police.
Yeah, while that's true, it also presents some challenges.
Right.
It can be more difficult to investigate crimes reported online,
Hmm.
potentially affecting clearance rates.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
It seems like there are pros and cons to consider as we move towards more digital reporting.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to calls for service. This is where it gets interesting because we're not just talking about 911 calls for crimes in progress.
You're absolutely right. We often associate police work with responding to like emergencies, criminal activity. But the reality is much broader. Total calls to the communications center increased from 618,321 in 2018
Oh.
to a staggering 783,248 in 2023.
That is a massive jump.
Right.
What's driving that increase if it's not all crime related?
Well, for the fourth year in a row, well-being checks topped the list of citizen-generated calls.
Well-being checks. I'm not entirely familiar with that term.
Okay.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Certainly. Imagine a concerned neighbor calling about someone who lives alone and hasn't been seen for a while.
Hmm.
Or a family member requesting the police to check on an elderly relative. These situations often fall under the umbrella of well-being checks.
So it's almost like a social service aspect to the work the police are doing.
Precisely. The police are increasingly responding to a broader range of community needs.
Yeah.
In addition to well-being checks, the reports also points to an increase in police-initiated events,
Okay.
particularly traffic stops, which likely contribute to the overall call volume.
Right, right. That's a really interesting point. It seems like the role of the police is evolving beyond traditional law enforcement.
Yeah.
Now let's take a step back and look at the overall crime severity trends.
Okay.
How does Winnipeg compare to Canada and Manitoba as a whole?
This is where those two perspectives, national and local,
Yeah,
provide an intriguing comparison.
right.
Statistics Canada data shows that both Canada and Manitoba experienced increases in their total crime severity index in 2023.
Okay.
However, Winnipeg bucked this trend
Okay.
with a decrease.
It sounds like good news for Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Does the report provide any insights into what drove this decrease?
The report attributes this decrease to a drop in nonviolent crime severity.
Okay.
This could indicate positive developments in terms of property crime, for
Yeah.
example. But it's important to remember that we're dealing with a complex picture here.
What do you mean by that?
Well, while Winnipeg saw an overall decrease in crime severity, it experienced an increase in violent crime severity. This is a significant detail.
Right.
Because it goes against the national and provincial trends.
So while things might be improving in some areas, there are still concerns, especially when it comes to violent crime.
Yeah.
I'm curious to learn more about that.
Absolutely. That's where we'll focus next. A
Ah.
deeper look at violent crime trends in Winnipeg.
Okay.
We'll examine the specific crimes driving this increase and what it might mean for you as a resident.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we delve into the specifics of violent crime in Winnipeg.
So we were just talking about violent crime in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
A category where, unfortunately, the city's trends diverge from the national and provincial data,
Right.
showing an increase.
Yes, that's a concerning trend. Let's dive into those details.
Mhm.
What can you tell us about the overall increase in violent crimes?
In 2023, Winnipeg experienced a 12.1% increase in violent crimes compared to 2022.
That's a pretty significant jump. It would be helpful to understand which specific crimes are driving that increase.
Two categories in particular stand out:
Okay.
robberies and assaults. Robberies saw a 21.9% increase,
Why?
while assaults went up by 17.3%. These are certainly alarming figures.
Those numbers are definitely concerning. Is there anything in the report that offers a possible explanation for these increases?
While the report doesn't delve into specific causes,
Yeah.
it does provide some additional context that might be relevant.
Okay.
One striking detail is that 44.1% of violent crimes in Winnipeg were stranger-related.
That is concerning. It suggests that you're more likely to be a victim of a violent crime by somebody you don't know
Right.
than by somebody you do.
Yeah.
What are the implications of that finding?
It raises important questions about personal safety in Winnipeg.
Yeah,
It suggests that residents need to be more vigilant about their surroundings
for sure.
and take appropriate precautions. It also underscores the need for effective community policing strategies that can address this type of crime.
Right. You're right. It's not about living in fear, but
Mhm.
it does highlight the need for awareness
Right.
and proactive measures to ensure your personal safety.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the next topic, are there any other details about violent crimes that you think are important for our listener to know?
Yes, there is a bit of good news to report.
Okay, great.
While robberies and assaults increased, homicides actually decreased by 13.2% in 2023.
That's certainly a positive development, although any loss of life is tragic.
Of course.
It's a complex picture with both encouraging and concerning trends. Now let's shift our focus to a topic that's often associated with violent crime: weapons.
Okay.
What insights does the data offer about weapons in crime in Winnipeg?
The data reveals a mixed bag when it comes to weapons-related crime.
Okay.
On a positive note, crimes involving bear spray and firearms decreased in 2023.
That's good news. It could indicate that efforts to control these types of weapons are having some positive effect.
It's certainly possible. However, we also see a significant increase in another area: knife crimes. These rose by 21.6% in 2023.
That's a substantial increase. Does the report provide any information about the types of violent crimes that typically involve weapons?
Yes, it does. The report states that in 2023, physical force was used in 50.6% of violent crimes.
Okay.
This was followed by threats at 13.9%, knives at 11.1%, firearms at 3.2%, and bear spray at 0.6%.
So while knives were used in a smaller percentage of violent crimes compared to physical force,
Right.
the significant increase in knife crimes is something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Are there any particular areas in Winnipeg where these weapon crimes are more concentrated?
The data indicates that downtown Point Douglas and River East
Okay.
experienced a disproportionate amount of weapon crimes.
Yeah, those areas tend to have higher population densities and face certain socioeconomic challenges.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a correlation there.
It's certainly a possibility. The concentration of weapon crimes in these areas raises questions about the availability of resources, community support systems, and the effectiveness of crime prevention strategies in those communities.
Those are important considerations. It seems like addressing the issue of weapons and violent crime requires a multifaceted approach
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
goes beyond simply law enforcement. We've talked a lot about violent crime and weapons. Let's turn our attention now to property crimes. What does the data tell us about that category?
Here we see a contrasting trend compared to violent crime.
Okay.
Overall, property crimes in Winnipeg decreased by 6.7% in 2023.
So some positive news on that front.
Yeah.
Are there any specific types of property crime that contributed to this decrease?
Yes, break and enters were down, and theft from motor vehicles saw a significant decrease,
Okay.
dropping by 24.8%.
It sounds like efforts to improve security measures
Yeah.
and public awareness campaigns might be paying off.
That's a possible explanation. However, there's one area within property crime
Okay.
that stands out as a bit of an anomaly:
Okay.
shoplifting.
What happened with shoplifting?
Shoplifting in Winnipeg saw a dramatic increase of 45.2% in 2023.
That's a startling increase. I'm curious to understand what might be driving this trend.
It's difficult to say for certain without further investigation.
Yeah.
Several factors could be contributing,
Sorry.
including economic hardship,
Mm-hmm.
changes in retail security measures,
Yeah.
or even shifts in social norms
Right.
and attitudes towards shoplifting.
Those are all interesting points. It'd be interesting to see if further research could shed light on the underlying causes of this dramatic spike in shoplifting.
Yeah.
The report also mentions the most commonly stolen items in 2023.
Right.
Could you tell us a bit about that?
The list is quite diverse
Right.
and includes personal accessories, motor vehicles,
Mm-hmm.
consumable goods, vehicle accessories,
Yeah.
Canadian currency, machinery, and tools,
Wow.
bicycles, fuel, and computers.
It sounds like people are stealing a wide range of items. I wonder if this is a reflection of changing needs or if it's simply opportunistic crime.
Yeah, who knows?
It's definitely something to ponder. We've covered a lot of ground here. Violent crimes, weapons, and now property crimes. Now, let's move on to a topic that often sparks a lot of discussion and debate: youth crime.
This is a complex issue with no easy answers. It's important to approach the data with sensitivity
Yes.
and consider the various factors that might be contributing to youth crime trends.
Absolutely. So what does the data reveal about youth crime in Winnipeg?
The overall picture is concerning. Youth crime saw an increase of 23.1% in 2023. What's particularly striking is that this increase was observed across all categories: violent crimes, property crimes, and other offenses.
Across the board, that's a significant increase. Are there any specific offenses that stand out as having particularly dramatic increases?
Two crimes saw particularly alarming increases:
Okay.
shoplifting and uttering threats.
Okay.
Shoplifting among youth skyrocketed by 141.4%.
That's over 100% increase. That's incredibly concerning. What about uttering threats?
Uttering threats also saw a substantial jump, rising by 41.4% in 2023.
So we're seeing significant increases in both property and violent offenses among youths.
Yeah.
It would be helpful to understand the age demographics involved in these crimes. We're talking about young children? Or are these teenagers?
The data indicates that the peak offending age for youth crime in 2023 was 16 years old.
Okay, so we're talking about teenagers who should be aware of the consequences of their actions.
Yeah.
It raises concerns about what factors might be leading them down this path.
It's a complex question with no easy answers.
For sure.
Poverty, lack of opportunity, peer pressure, and mental health challenges could all play a role.
Right.
It's essential to consider the underlying causes of youth crime and explore interventions that address those root issues.
You're absolutely right. Punitive measures alone are unlikely to solve the problem. We need to invest in prevention, support systems, and programs that provide young people with positive alternatives. Now let's switch gears for a moment and discuss a topic that affects everyone on the roads:
Okay.
impaired driving and traffic violations.
This is an area where the data reveals some interesting and somewhat contradictory trends.
Yep.
Impaired driving offenses involving alcohol saw a slight increase, which is concerning.
Right.
However, other traffic violations, such as speeding and running red lights, actually decreased.
Yeah, so more people might be driving under the influence of alcohol, but fewer people are getting caught for other traffic violations. That seems a little counterintuitive.
It does, and it's important to note a crucial detail.
Okay.
While alcohol-related impaired driving offenses saw a slight increase, offenses involving both alcohol and drugs experienced a more significant jump,
Okay.
rising by 13%.
That suggests that we're dealing with a more complex problem than just alcohol-related impaired driving.
Precisely. We need to address the issue of impaired driving from a broader perspective,
Yeah?
considering the increasing prevalence of drug use and the dangers of driving under the influence of any substance.
You're right. It's not just about cracking down on drunk driving. It's about educating people about the risks associated with any form of impairment. Does the report shed any light on the effectiveness of traffic enforcement measures?
Yes, it does. The report highlights the significant role of photo enforcement in catching traffic violations.
Ah, those red light cameras and speed cameras.
Right.
They certainly seem to be catching a lot of people.
The numbers support that observation.
Okay.
Photo-enforced Highway Traffic Act violations increased by 18.7% in 2023.
Wow, that's a substantial increase.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting to know if this is having a deterrent effect or if people are simply becoming more accustomed to those cameras.
It's a complex issue with potential pros and cons. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's touch on two more categories:
Okay.
domestic events and hate crimes. These are sensitive but crucial topics to address. Absolutely. Domestic violence and hate crimes are serious issues that demand attention and action.
Yeah.
The data provides some insights into the prevalence of these crimes in Winnipeg.
Okay, let's start with domestic events. What can you tell us about that category?
In 2023, the Winnipeg police responded to 17,652 domestic dispatched events.
Okay.
This number is consistent with previous years, indicating an ongoing challenge in addressing domestic violence.
So unfortunately, no significant improvement in that area. What about hate crimes?
The data shows a decrease in hate crimes in 2023,
Right.
with 38 incidents reported.
That's a positive development, although even one hate crime is too many.
Of course.
Does the report provide any details about the types of hate crimes that were reported?
Yes, it does. The most common motivations for hate crimes in 2023 were religion and race ethnicity.
That's disturbing to hear, but unfortunately not entirely surprising. It's a reminder that prejudice and discrimination persist in our society. It's crucial that we continue to work towards building a more inclusive and tolerant community where everyone feels safe and respected. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive,
We have.
exploring various types of crimes and their trends in Winnipeg.
Right.
But there's one more crucial element we need to discuss: clearance rates.
Right.
This data provides insight into the effectiveness of police investigations and how successfully crimes are being solved.
You're absolutely right. Clearance rates are an important indicator of police performance and the overall effectiveness of the justice system. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into those clearance rates
Okay.
and examine how they vary across different crime categories.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore the clearance rates for various crimes in Winnipeg and what they might tell us about the city's efforts to address criminal activity. So we've spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive going through crime trends in Winnipeg, and now it's time to talk about clearance rates.
Okay.
These tell us how effectively the police are solving crimes. What can you tell us about these rates?
Yeah, clearance rates are an important metric. They
Mm.
give us insight into how successful investigations are.
Yeah.
And the good news is that in Winnipeg, we're seeing an overall increase in clearance rates across all crime categories.
That sounds pretty encouraging.
Yeah.
Are there any areas where those clearance rates are particularly strong?
The data highlights 2 categories
Okay.
with impressive clearance rates. Other crimes had an 88.5% clearance rate in 2023,
Wow.
while drug crimes came in even higher
Okay.
at 96.7%.
Wow, those are really high numbers.
Right.
What factors might contribute to such strong clearance rates in those areas?
It's tough to say definitively without further analysis.
Right.
But it's possible that the nature of these crimes lends itself to more straightforward investigations.
Oh.
For example, drug crimes often involve tangible evidence and witness testimonies, which can aid in identifying and apprehending suspects.
Right. That makes sense. What about the other categories? How do their clearance rates compare?
Well, unfortunately, property crimes had a relatively low clearance rate
Okay.
of 9.9%.
That's less than 1 in 10 property crimes being solved.
Yeah.
Why such a low rate for this category?
There could be several contributing factors.
Okay.
We've already discussed the increase in online crime reporting.
Right.
It's possible that investigating crimes reported online presents unique challenges.
Mhm.
For example, it might be more difficult to gather physical evidence
Yeah.
or identify witnesses in those cases.
That's a good point. It seems like the shift towards digital reporting, while convenient, might also have some unintended consequences when it comes to solving these crimes. Are there any other factors that you think might contribute to the lower clearance rate for property crimes?
Resource constraints within the police service could also be a factor.
Well,
Investigating property crimes can be time-consuming and resource-intensive.
yeah.
And if the police are stretched thin dealing with other types of calls and incidents, it's possible that property crime investigations receive less attention.
It's a complex issue with multiple layers to consider.
Yeah.
Okay, we've talked about clearance rates in general. Now let's shift gears and look at how these crime trends play out on a more localized level.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about specific communities in Winnipeg and their experiences with crime?
The data gets really interesting when we zoom in on individual communities.
Yeah.
It allows us to move beyond citywide averages
Right.
and examine the unique challenges and trends in different areas. One area that immediately stands out is the downtown zone.
I can see why downtown would be a focus. It's a hub of activity with a really diverse population. What does the data reveal about crime in this area?
The downtown zone consistently sees a disproportionate amount of crime,
Mm-hmm.
particularly violent crime.
Yeah.
In 2023, it accounted for a staggering 65.8% of the city's total crime.
Wow, that's almost 2/3 of all crime in Winnipeg occurring in one zone. What factors might contribute to this concentration of criminal activity downtown?
Downtown Winnipeg has a high population density, a mix of residential, commercial, and entertainment venues,
For sure.
and faces challenges with poverty, homelessness, and substance use. These factors can create an environment where crime is more likely to occur.
It sounds like a combination of social and environmental factors might be at play. Are there any other communities highlighted in the report that are worth mentioning?
The report draws attention to a few others. Assiniboine South had the second highest proportion of total crime at 17.6%,
Okay.
followed by Fort Garry at 15.8%. Point Douglas also stood out with a significant proportion of weapons crimes, particularly those involving knives reported in that community.
So it's clear that different communities experience different types and levels of crime. What are the implications of these localized trends?
It suggests that a one-size-fits-all approach to crime prevention and law enforcement might not be effective.
Right.
Strategies need to be tailored to the specific needs and challenges of each community.
Yeah.
It also highlights the importance of community involvement and collaboration
Yeah.
between residents, community organizations, and the police to address these issues.
You've made some excellent points. We've explored a wealth of data about crime in Winnipeg.
Yeah, we have.
From citywide trends to localized patterns, we've looked at specific types of crimes, their prevalence, and the challenges in addressing them. But the question remains, what does all of this mean for our listener? How can they use this information to navigate their daily lives and understand the complexities of crime in their city?
It's essential to remember that statistics only paint a partial picture.
Right.
Behind those numbers are real people and real stories.
For sure.
This data should empower our listener to become more informed and engaged citizens. It can spark conversations about community safety, raise awareness of the challenges faced by different communities, and encourage people to support initiatives aimed at crime prevention and social support.
That's a great point. Knowledge is power.
It is.
And by understanding these trends, our listener can make more informed decisions about their personal safety and contribute to a safer community. Any final thoughts for our listener before we wrap up this deep dive?
I encourage our listener to continue exploring this topic.
Yeah.
The reports we've discussed offer a wealth of information. Delve into those community-specific reports. Research those social programs aimed at youth crime prevention, and engage in conversations about these issues with your friends, family, and neighbors.
Those are excellent suggestions. Remember, this deep dive has provided a solid foundation, but there's always more to learn. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged in making Winnipeg a safer and more vibrant city for everyone. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.